What's happening, people? Welcome to United View and welcome to a special show. As promised, my guy, Mr. Keith Downie, Newcastle reporter from Sky Sports, his very own. We had to bring him on the channel because there's so much going on with this Dan Ashworth situation. There's so much posturing. There's so much figures being branded about. And I said, you know what? To clarify the situation, there's only one man who can do this, and that is Keith Downie. So, Keith, thank you so much for joining us, man. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good, mate. Thank you for having me. Nice to be on. I've been speaking about Dan Ashworth for about 10 days now, so apologies if I go over any old ground or I sound like I'm falling asleep. But yeah, it's one of those stories that just won't go away.
Exactly, mate. And United fans want to know what it's like from a Newcastle perspective and to just gain more insight. So I think, do you know what? I'm just going to jump straight to the very top of the list of what I think most Man United fans want to know. Is what is the situation regarding this compensation package? This 20 million that is supposedly the price on Dan Ashworth's head to prize him away, where Newcastle basically won't budge. Is that the case? How do you understand that to be?
I mean, look, I think they will budge because you've got an employee there who is already on gardening leave. He's costing Newcastle, I think, circa about £30,000 a week to have him on gardening leave right now. Now, I think his contract says that he could essentially be on gardening leave for 2 years. So, I mean, I'd love to see what his garden's going to be like after that amount of time. I mean, I'm just looking outside here at my house. I've got a little bit of work. He could pop round and maybe cut my grass if he wanted. Look, I think they'll come to. I think they'll probably come to an agreement. I don't think it helps. I don't think it helps anyone for him to be on gardening leave for the best part of 2 years. There's also a lot of respect between the hierarchy at Newcastle and Dan Ashworth himself. Look, the relations there are still good. It's not like there's been this massive breakdown behind the scenes. There is still a lot of respect there, and I think they will try and help the process. I also don't think it's healthy to have him there on gardening leave for that amount of time either. Now, Flex quoted £20 million there. The noises coming out of certain sources around this is that is what Newcastle are looking for, but I believe that will be their starting point in terms of what they ask for. I would be very surprised if they don't come to an agreement somewhere below that, maybe somewhere, I'm speculating here, but perhaps somewhere between 10 and 15 million. And, I know a lot of people will say, that's a lot of money for an executive. That's a lot of money for a suit, if you like, rather than a player. But this is the guy who's going to be charged or tasked with trying to bring these top players in at Manchester United for the next 3, 5, 10 years, whatever it may be. So, look, I think Manchester United, under the new ownership, know that they need to get this one right. There's obviously been a lot of courting, shall we say, from Gary Neville, who's I think he's probably made it clear to them that this is who you should be trying to bring in. I think they know that themselves. I think Dan Ashworth is very close to Dave Brailsford there. And I just don't think it would help anyone if Newcastle were to dig their heels in and allow him to remain on gardening leave for 2 years. Now, look, I think Newcastle are tough negotiators. They've showed that in a lot of the transfers that they've been involved in since the takeover 2.5 years ago. But I would be amazed if they stand firm for 20 million. I think it will be a little bit less than that, as I say, whether it's 10 million, 12, 15, something like that. But without doubt, they've been left with a bit of a bloody nose because, they feel like they're losing one of the main appointments they made after the takeover, and one of the ones that they're very proud of. They're losing him to a rival, but I just don't think it aids anyone if he's there for a year and a half, 2 years on gardening leave. So £20 million a starting point. It's like flex if you go to buy a house.
Exactly.
Someone asks for a certain amount, you put an offer in a little bit less than that. It's a bit like a football transfer. Brentford are saying that they want 100 million plus for Ivan Toney. Are they going to get it? They might get that if there's a market there, but it's only Manchester United that are trying to get Dan Ashworth here. So that is why I think they will come to an agreement somewhere below that. And what that will do for Newcastle is, I'm told, is it'll stop them having to sell one of their top players in the summer. The first thing Dan Ashworth was going to have to do this summer, before he bought anyone, was to sell a Bruno Guimaraes or a Joe Linton, because Newcastle are so close to their financial fair play regulations. With Dan Ashworth going himself, that will alleviate that, and they're not going to have to do that. So
that was going to be my next question, actually, Keith, in terms of Newcastle's PSR situation. I mean, obviously, I was in at Sky covering it, obviously, with yourself, and we were looking at it intently as to what their position was in regards to PSR. And we saw Darren Neal's talking so candidly about it to Newcastle fans to let them know literally where they're at. And that was what I was going to ask you. What type of impact can Dan Ashworth leave and have on their PSL? But you literally just said it there. It's that big, is it? It's that significant that it literally means that they wouldn't have to sell a big player because Dan Ashworth went then.
Yeah. I mean, It sounds ridiculous now.
That's insane.
It sounds ridiculous now.
Yeah.
I mean, the fact that you can sell essentially, which is what they're going to do. They're going to sell a director of football to allow them to keep a playmaker in midfield. Shows how important these guys are becoming in the world of football, And look, I think Manchester United are well aware of that. The noise is coming out of Manchester United from my colleagues that cover the club. Is that Manchester United will not be held to ransom, which I think is a bit weird. They're coming out and kind
We're
of briefing that.
Changing. It's different now, Keith. It's different.
Yeah, but imagine Newcastle hearing that. Like, they've just poached their sporting director, who they tried so long to get. They had to sit. He was on garden leave from Brighton for about 6 months before he started at Newcastle, right? And now they're hearing, Man United have essentially tapped him up behind the scenes, but they won't be held to ransom. So you can imagine there's a bit of frustration there from Newcastle at the way Man United have kind of gone about this. But I think they know that as time goes on, they know that the right thing to do will be to release him if they get what they're looking for. And while they say while the noise is they're looking for 20 million right now, I think it will be significantly less than that. But in terms of the job itself at Newcastle, he probably didn't have quite the amount of control as what he maybe expected when he came in. There was already a pre-existing recruitment team. The owners had come in 6-7 months earlier. Eddie Howe and his recruitment, because he brought his own recruitment guys with him who'd been with him at Bournemouth. One of them is actually his nephew Andy, who's very good, and he's actually scouted quite a few top players for Bournemouth, and he's done a good job in some of the players Newcastle have brought in over the last 2 years. These guys were all in situ already, so I think when Dan actually arrived in the summer of 2022, he was almost walking into something that was already set up, and I think he's probably found it difficult to stamp his own authority on that. And while he's done a good job, and I'm told relations are good, Eddie Howe said at his news conference last Friday, and this is the main takeaway I took from it. He said, look, the biggest compliment I can pay Dan is he came into the job in June 2022 and he didn't change anything. So perhaps his influence in terms of transfers has been a little bit passive. And I think when he goes to Manchester United, that's not going to be the case. He's going to be get the keys to the place with regards to recruitment.
All on him, mate.
Yeah, exactly. And I think for someone like him, I don't think you can turn your nose at that. It's one of the biggest clubs in the world, if not the biggest club in the world. He's probably going to get paid double the amount of what he was getting at Newcastle, and he's going to have a lot more power. When you look at it like that, it's a no-brainer for him.
Yeah. In terms of how quickly he can get into post, so the compensation package is one thing. I think Manchester United fans would really, really wanted to know what that is. So thanks for clearing that up for us about the current state of play with that. With all that being said, if they can reach this compromise on a fee, is it feasible that Dan Ashworth could be in post, gardening leave taken into account, by the summer? Or even if they do come to a fairly good financial resolution fairly quickly, that would still be, sort of difficult to do?
Flex, I honestly think, and this is just my reading of the situation, this isn't on any information I've been told, but I think Newcastle will try to avoid him taking up the new post before the summer. And that is because for, the last, 18 months, nearly 2 years, he's been privy to all of Newcastle's sensitive information, their transfer information, their recruitment, what they're trying to do, the players that they're already targeting this summer. And imagine there's 2 or 3 players that he spotted there and thinks, you know what, these are guys in Europe that Newcastle could get on the cheap. But if I join Manchester United, we could just put an extra couple of million on the top and then nick these players. And I think there's a real concern from Newcastle that he's privy to all that information. And that's why I think they'll try and extend the gardening leave to beyond the summer. But I wouldn't be surprised if he was in situ for perhaps the January transfer window next year. Now, listen, that might not happen. Manchester United might put enough money up to prize him away earlier, but I think Newcastle will try and dig their heels in and ensure that he isn't in a position to be in charge of Manchester United's recruitment in the summer on the back of all this work he's done at Newcastle, because that could leave Newcastle a little bit short in terms of what they're trying to do in the summer. Going straight into a rival and essentially potentially could be pinching their ideas or pinching the players that they're going for. So my reading of the situation is they'll try and extend the garden leave beyond the summer and come to an agreement with Manchester United to sell him then. I don't know the fee. I know I've said between 10 and 15. Again, that's me just surmising. I just don't think it'll be as much as 20.
Yeah. I agree with it not being 20. Obviously, from a Man United fan's perspective, I think it's what we're kind of looking for is hopefully that Dan Ashworth can be in post, obviously, by the summer. For me as a fan, it's like I want Ineos to get all of this sorted in the lead up to summer. Omar Barada's already done. He's going to start. You want Dan Ashworth in there. Whether it's Jason Wilcox or whoever, other people to come in and get ready for the summer. So that is a slight, downer on it. But to be fair, it's understandable. And I know you're saying that's sort of your opinion on it, but I can absolutely see why they wouldn't want that to happen, because they're going to get all their targets nicked. But even if he is on, let's say, garden leave past that, is there still that, in your opinion, this is obviously not official, is there still that sort of, well, he just hasn't not had a conversation with Jim Ratcliffe in that time, and little feelers on a different phone or something, like where he's not actually doing the job? Or is it like it's so strict, it's like, no, because if he got caught doing that, you get in serious trouble? Or when this sort of thing does happen, is there sort of loopholes and ways around things?
Yeah, I honestly, mate, I think the latter.
Yeah.
I think the latter. I think there's so much money at stake here, and the contracts are so watertight. I don't think you can get away with any of that.
Yeah.
And I think back to when he took over the Newcastle job. He was appointed in February 2022. I think he had 9 months worth of gardening leave, or it was to take him up until the end of the year, maybe 10 months. Newcastle eventually paid up more to release him in time for it. So it's a very similar situation to this.
Pay more, you might be able to get him. If you don't, then you can't.
Yeah, so I'm not saying that won't happen. It still might happen. But I think for that to happen, I think Man United are going to have to really stump up. And that is when you might see the price rising towards the £20 million if they want him in his position for the summer. But if Newcastle dig their heels in, and I would not be surprised if they do, because they're quite tough negotiators these days since the takeover. They also, as you rightly said, are really close to their PSR parameters. So they'll do everything to extract as much money out of any situation as they can. So I'm not saying that he will not be in place for the summer, but if that is the case, they are going to have to pay up. With regards to your second point there, I honestly believe, and having witnessed the situation when he took over from Brighton 2 years ago, there's no way he can really do any work behind the scenes due to how tight their contracts are. So Manchester United, if they want him to be in place, are going to have to pay up. So it'll be interesting to see. Look, if Newcastle manage to get someone else in, and you might find that in a couple of months' time, they might just look at it a little bit differently and might just but it's all very fresh at the moment. It's quite raw. You heard Eddie Howe at this conference last Friday. I mean, it was almost a bit of a backhanded compliment, the one to Dan Ashworth. He said that the best compliment I can give him is he's not done anything. And he said, look, we'll just carry on as normal. And what he was trying to say there is, although Dan Ashworth has been a big influence in the place, and I think he's helped with the negotiations, bringing in Tonali from AC Milan, Isak from Real Sociedad, he's got a lot of these transfers over the line. These weren't players that Dan Ashworth has come in and scouted and recruited. These were players that Eddie Howe and his recruitment team have, and Dan Ashworth has almost just like sealed the deal. So it was, I mean, it sounds as though the role he's going to have at Manchester United is a lot more like the role he thought he would have at Newcastle at the outset. Probably not quite transpired as he thought it would be. Whereas he's going to come in at Manchester United, brand new owners. He's going to be one of the first people in the door, one of the first appointments. He's going to have a huge say in everything. Whereas he came in later in the Newcastle project, and I think he found it a bit more difficult. I think he found it a bit harder to kind of have as much influence on transfers as he maybe hoped to.
Yeah, that definitely seems like what he's going to get from Manchester United. So hopefully it all gets done. Lastly, Keith, I wanted just to ask you just a little bit more about the man. How good is he? Obviously, we read things and we've all done a little bit of our own research and looking into his CV, and we've seen what he's done from West Brom through to Brighton, at the FA as well, and obviously at Newcastle, etc., etc. Just how good is Dan Ashworth?
Well, I think he commands respect, doesn't he, across the footballing world. And look, there's no surprise that Newcastle got these deals done. Although, forget about the fact that Sandro Tonali's been banned for 10 months because of the betting. The fact he went over there, managed to get that deal done. There were other clubs interested. There was the exact same for Isak, Sven Botman. He got these deals over the line, and I think that's because he commands so much respect. Look, I've got a lot of friends who actually work at the club behind the scenes in the commercial department and the financial part of the club, and they say he's so impressive. We actually, as journalists, had an interview with him a couple of months ago in the back of the Tonali situation, and he came out and explained a lot of it off the record. And I have to say, I was very impressed with the way he told the story and explained the situation and was very open about it. Without doubt, he's a top operator. But on the flip side of that, what I will say is, and I've alluded to it already, probably Newcastle's best transfer window since the takeover was the first one, when they signed Bruno Guimaraes and Kieran Trippier. That was before Dan Ashworth was at the club. Okay, and what I'll also add is that Brighton and Hove Albion, since Dan Ashworth has left, continue to bring through top talent who are getting sold on for a lot of money. So I don't think you can actually just put all of it on one man and say it's all down to him. I think he is influential, and in his words, what he is he says he's the middle of the wheel that brings all the spokes together. So he kind of brings all the departments together and makes them work.
That's exactly what Manchester United need.
Alongside each other. So in terms of that, I think he's great. Recruitment, he's obviously good at it, but it sounds very much to me like what he did at Brighton and Newcastle is probably going to be less. It looks like he's going to be given a lot more power at Manchester United, and perhaps this is what he's been looking for and waiting for some time. But look, you don't get offered a job as sporting director at Manchester United if you're not highly regarded, and I actually think he'll go on and flourish in the job. And I think if we look back in a year or 2 years' time, probably Newcastle admit it themselves, it was probably the best for everyone for him to move on and take that role, because it's one of the biggest roles in football at the moment, and he's going to have so much responsibility and power there that perhaps was not going to come his way at Newcastle due to the existing structure.
Yeah, absolutely. Listen, Keith, you've been absolutely spot on as usual, mate. Always keeping us informed. I'm sure our viewers will really appreciate the inside sort of scoop you've just given us there. And to you guys watching at home, if you want to see more and find out more about the situation, Keith has his YouTube channel, Sky Sports Keith, correct?
That's it, mate. Yeah, it's mostly Newcastle stuff. I'll warn you now. If you don't want to read any Newcastle stuff or watch Newcastle stuff,
they do, mate. If they see Newcastle in pain, or if they see them moaning about the amount of money we have to pay, we want to see. We've been going back and forth. I've been giving it to a few Newcastle fans, sort of saying, when a big club comes knocking, what can you do? All of this stuff. But it's all in jest and it's good. So make sure you guys get over and subscribe to Keith's YouTube channel. The link is in the video description below to do that. Keith, listen, thank you so much for coming on, and I'm sure we'll speak to you again soon, mate. Thank you.
No worries. Just flex.
Take care, mate. Take care. Bye-bye.